I never thought a simple backyard decision could make my whole neighborhood hate me. Until the HOA slapped me with a $50,000 fine for hoarding water. You heard that. Right, $50,000. All because I refused to let them dictate how I handled rainwater on my own property. And if you think that's crazy, just wait. It gets worse. It all started one rainy afternoon. I was sipping my coffee on the back porch, watching the barrels in my backyard fill with rainwater. It was a simple setup, a few barrels, some tubing, and a small pond I'd dug months ago. Nothing fancy, nothing illegal, or so I thought. But in this neighborhood, nothing is ever simple. You see, I live in a quiet, manicured suburban community. Perfect lawns, pristine sidewalks, white picket fences, like every Instagram post about suburban life. But behind that postcard-perfect image lurked something else, an HOA that monitored everything. And I mean everything. They patrolled lawns like cops on a beat, measured hedges, inspected flower beds, and apparently tracked water usage. And when they came across my little backyard project, they went ballistic. "This is a violation," the letter said. "You are hoarding water. Immediate compliance is required. Failure to comply will result in a $50,000 fine." I remember staring at that letter, my coffee slipping from my fingers. $50,000? For collecting rainwater on my own property? I laughed at first. Then I called the HOA office. "There must be a mistake," I said. "No mistake," said the HOA rep, sounding smug. "Rules are rules. You're holding water against the community's interest. Pay the fine or face further action." I hung up, my hands shaking. My mind raced. How could anyone justify this? How could rain falling on my own roof suddenly become a crime? For days I tried reasoning with them. I emailed, I called, I begged. Each time the same robotic response. Rules are rules. Pay the fine. Meanwhile, my neighbors started noticing. Some looked at me with curiosity, some with suspicion, and a few were downright gossipy. "Did you see what he's doing?" whispered Mrs. Reynolds next door, her nose pressed against her window. "He's hoarding water. The HOA said it's illegal." "It's just rain," I muttered to myself. "Rain falling from the sky belongs to everyone, right? Or maybe to the HOA? I couldn't let it go. I refused to be bullied, and I certainly wasn't going to let them take $50,000 from me without a fight. But I knew I had to be smart. The HOA had rules, yes, but rules weren't laws, and rules weren't reality. The first confrontation came 2 weeks later. I was in my backyard, checking the water levels in the barrels, when 3 HOA board members showed up at my gate. They were all dressed in the same pastel polo shirts, khaki shorts, and those smug, overconfident smiles. "We need to talk about your water retention system," the lead rep said. "This is my property," I said, so standing tall. "I'm collecting rainwater. It's not illegal." "Rules are rules," the rep repeated as if I'd never heard it before. "You're in violation. We're giving you 48 hours to remove the system or face $50,000 in fines." I laughed, but not out loud, not yet. Inside, I was boiling. 48 hours. You're kidding me. That night, I sat in the dark, staring at my backyard, thinking. My backyard was small but functional. The barrels collected rainwater, which I used to water my garden, which I maintained better than most lawns on the street. I'd even started a small pond stocked with fish because, why not? I loved nature. I loved watching it thrive. And now, according to the HOA, that made me a criminal. I could feel anger rising, but also a strange sense of clarity. If I just gave in, they'd win. They'd take my money, my pride, and the satisfaction of doing something good for my own home. No, I couldn't do that. The next morning, I started planning. I needed to make a point, something bold, something undeniable, something they couldn't just ignore or sweep under the rug. I started small. I documented everything. My barrels, my pond, the pipes, the way water flowed from my roof into my system. I took pictures, videos, notes. I needed proof. And more importantly, I needed control. As the days passed, I noticed the neighborhood watching me more closely. The neighbors whispered when they thought I wasn't looking. Some children waved curiously from windows, while older residents shook their heads in disapproval. The HOA sent more letters, each one more threatening than the last. "We are escalating this matter," one letter read. "Your continued non-compliance will result in further legal action." Legal action? Against someone who collects rainwater on their own property? I nearly choked on my coffee. But instead of fear, a fire ignited inside me. "If they want a war," I whispered, "then a war they'll get." I started making preparations. I read everything I could about water retention systems, legal loopholes, and what homeowners are allowed to do. I talked to engineers, friends, even online forums filled with people fighting ridiculous HOA rules. Each story inspired me. Each loophole felt like a key. Then came the idea, the first spark of what would eventually become my masterpiece plan. What if I could use their obsession with control against them? What if I could show them and the entire neighborhood just how ridiculous this fine was? And what if I could do it in a way that was bold, unforgettable, and completely legal? I started digging, not just into my backyard, but into every rule, regulation, and clause the HOA had. I read meeting minutes, community guidelines, and past enforcement actions. Patterns emerged. They were obsessed with appearances, control, and compliance. But they couldn't stop nature. They couldn't stop water. Water, I realized, was my weapon. Over the next few days, I worked in secret. I adjusted, reinforced the pond, and built small barriers. All completely legal, all completely safe. But from the right perspective, it would look unstoppable, powerful, shocking. Then came the storm. A real one. Clouds rolled in, dark and heavy. Rain started as a drizzle, then picked up pace. My barrels filled rapidly. My pond swelled. The water levels rose faster than I expected. But that was perfect. That was exactly what I needed. I stood on my porch watching the water rise. The HOA had no idea what was coming. The neighbors would soon see, and I felt alive, electric with anticipation. "This is it," I whispered. "The moment they realize I don't answer to them." The next day, as the rain continued, the HOA reps arrived again. They were visibly annoyed, clutching clipboards and letters. I stepped out onto the porch, water already ankle-deep around my yard. "Morning," I said, smiling. "Lovely weather, isn't it?" "You need to stop this," the lead rep barked. "We've warned you." "Stop what?" I asked innocently. "Enjoying the rain?" They glared at me, sputtering, clearly unprepared for my calm defiance. At that moment, I realized something important. This wasn't just about water, barrels, or fines. It was about control, pride, and standing up for yourself, even when the odds were stacked against you. And I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Little did they know, I had a plan that would change everything. And when it unfolded, it would shock the HOA, the neighborhood, and anyone who ever thought rules could crush common sense. "If you think this is just a backyard dispute," I told myself, "you're about to see the full storm." By the end of part 1, viewers are hooked. They see the absurdity of the $50,000 fine, understand the protagonist's anger and ingenuity, and are ready to follow the unfolding plan. If you've ever felt trapped by rules that make no sense, keep watching. What happens next isn't just a fight, it's a lesson in standing your ground. Trust me, you don't want to miss what comes next. I was done playing by their rules. $50,000 wasn't just money. It was a message. A message that the HOA couldn't control me. And that's when I started building my plan. A plan they would never see coming. The storm had passed, leaving my backyard soaked and my mind buzzing with possibilities. I spent that night pacing, thinking through every scenario. I needed to be bold. I needed to be clever. And most importantly, I needed to stay completely legal, because if I slipped up, the HOA would use it as an excuse to escalate even further. I started by studying water dynamics. I read about retention ponds, overflow systems, and natural barriers. I sketched diagrams, calculated capacities, and even measured the slope of my yard. Every detail mattered. Every inch could be the difference between a subtle statement and an unforgettable spectacle. My goal wasn't destruction. I didn't want to hurt anyone, but I wanted the HOA and the entire neighborhood to see the power of nature and how absurd their fine had been. I called a friend who worked in civil engineering. He laughed when I explained the idea. "You're serious?" he said. "Completely," I replied. "Okay, but you have to be careful. Make sure it's controlled, safe, and won't flood anyone's house. You don't want to go to jail." That night, I started building small, barriers in the backyard, little, dams and channels that could guide the water. I reinforced the edges of my pond with sandbags and stones. I rerouted the rain barrels to fill the pond faster. Everything was measured, precise, and safe. but from the street it would look dramatic. Over the next week, the neighborhood started noticing my unusual activity. Some neighbors whispered, others just stared. A few children peeked over fences, curious. The HOA? They sent letters, of course. Threats, warnings, and reminders of the looming $50,000 fine. But I wasn't worried. I was ready. The storm returned. Dark clouds rolled in, heavy and threatening. Rain began to pour steadily, drumming on rooftops and gathering in gutters. I could feel the anticipation building in my chest. This was it, the moment when all my preparation would come into play. By mid-afternoon, the barrels were full. The pond was swelling. Water was already creeping toward the edge of my property. I watched it closely, heart racing. Every adjustment, every sandbag, every channel mattered. Then the HOA showed up. 3 representatives, their faces pale under the gray skies. They carried clipboards, their usual smug confidence replaced with visible tension. What's going on here? The lead rep demanded. Just enjoying the rain, I replied with a calm smile. It's amazing how powerful nature can be, isn't it? They stepped closer, inspecting the backyard. Their expressions shifted from disbelief to worry as they noticed the channels, the rising pond, and the barrels. You've modified your property, one said. Technically, yes, I answered, but all within legal bounds. I'm just letting nature do its thing. Their faces turned red, but there was nothing they could do. No laws had been broken, and that's when I knew the moment of truth had arrived. I activated the final part of my system. Small release valves, channels, and barrels started guiding water toward the street, but in a controlled, safe manner. Water began spilling over the edges, rushing down my driveway, and into the small channels I had prepared. The effect was immediate. From the street, it looked dramatic, even alarming. Water gushed like a miniature flood, floating leaves, twigs, and even a few small garden ornaments. Neighbors peeked from windows, some screaming, some laughing, some simply frozen in shock. What is he doing? One woman whispered. Is this safe? Another asked. The HOA reps stared at me, mouths open. I could see the panic in their eyes. They had never seen anything like this. Stop this immediately! Red Rep shouted. I'm not stopping nature, I said with a calm smile. It has its own rules. I guided the water with precision, watching as it flowed along my channels, avoiding any houses, avoiding any real damage, but still making a statement. The street was alive with rushing water. The backyard had become a miniature torrent, and the neighborhood had front row seats. Then it happened. The water reached the bottom of the HOA's, cherished rules, the moment when they realized that their control was meaningless against something as unstoppable as nature. Neighbors started talking. Whispered conversations turned into audible comments. A few brave souls stepped outside to watch. Some children cheered, splashing their feet in puddles. I could feel their energy, their quiet support, even if they wouldn't openly say it. Look at that, a neighbor shouted. He's letting it flow. That's kind of amazing. This is insane, muttered another. But wow, the HOA reps were flustered. Clipboards were waved, papers rustled, voices raised. But I stood calmly, hands on hips, smiling as the water did its work. I didn't shout. I didn't panic. I just let the system I had built do exactly what I had planned. As the water continued to flow, a strange feeling came over me. It wasn't just satisfaction, it was liberation. I had been cornered, threatened, and fined unfairly. But now I had turned the tables, and I had done it without breaking a single law. The storm intensified. Rain poured harder. My channels directed more water toward the street, but safely. The spectacle grew. It looked wild, chaotic, and powerful, but in reality, it was carefully controlled. I turned to watch the HOA reps argue among themselves, realizing that their authority was slipping right through their fingers. Their fines, their letters, their threats. They meant nothing in the face of nature itself. You see, I whispered, mostly to myself, they can't control this. They can't control me, and they certainly can't control nature. The neighbors' reactions were priceless. Some laughed, some gasped, some clutched their pearls. A few even started filming on their phones. I could see the viral potential already, the perfect story of rebellion, ingenuity, and standing up to bureaucracy. By the evening, the rain began to ease. The backyard pond had overflowed gracefully into the channels I had built. Water had reached the street but stopped before causing any damage. The HOA reps were soaked, frustrated, and defeated. This isn't over, the lead rep hissed. Oh, I think it is, I replied. Nature has a way of taking care of things. That night, I stood on my porch looking at the aftermath. Streets wet, debris floating harmlessly, and the neighborhood buzzing with excitement. I felt a surge of pride. I had faced an impossible fine, stood against a ridiculous rule, and won without breaking a law. It was exhilarating, empowering, liberating, and I knew this was just beginning. The story wouldn't end here. The HOA would learn a lesson, the neighborhood would remember this, and I would have a moment to savor that pure, unfiltered satisfaction of standing up for myself. If you think I'm done, I whispered, you're wrong. The real fun hasn't even started. If you thought this was just a small act of rebellion, stick around, because what happens next is the most shocking part. The streets, the neighbors, and the HOA, the streets were flooded. The HOA lost control, and for the first time, I wasn't under pressure, I was in control. And that $50,000 fine, let's just say, they got more than they bargained for. The morning after the storm, I stepped outside and surveyed the scene. My backyard was a mix of puddles, overflowing channels, and barrels now half empty. Water had spilled onto the street just enough to create a dramatic spectacle, but carefully. Nothing was damaged. Neighbors were already outside, some staring in disbelief, others whispering excitedly. A few kids splashed in the shallow water, laughing. I could see cameras popping up, phones, tablets, even a neighbor's drone hovering overhead. And there they were, the HOA reps, standing on the curb, soaked, clutching soggy clipboards. Their faces were a mix of shock, anger, and embarrassment. It was the look of people who had tried to control everything and realized they couldn't. Control nature or me. This is unacceptable, the lead rep sputtered. You've flooded the street. I call it letting nature handle the rest, I replied, smiling calmly. And technically, I didn't flood anyone's property. The irony wasn't lost on me. Their rules had been designed to make me pay, to assert dominance. And now, after days of threats and intimidation, they had lost. But the story didn't end there. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. Social media posts popped up. Videos of water flowing, channels overflowing, and me standing confidently in my backyard. People were commenting, "This is brilliant. Finally, someone stood up to the HOA. Who knew a little rainwater could cause such chaos?" I even got a few messages from neighbors I didn't know personally. "You're a legend. Thanks for showing them." Inside the HOA office, chaos reigned. Phone calls, angry emails, and complaints were flying everywhere. Members argued over how to respond. I had effectively exposed their overreach without breaking any laws, and everyone knew it. Then came the unexpected twist. The HOA called me directly, not to threaten but to negotiate. We want to discuss this situation," said the lead rep, voice shaky. "Sure," I replied. "I'm listening." We met the next day at a neutral location. I walked in confidently, prepared for anything. They tried intimidation, reminding me of the $50,000 fine, and emphasizing the seriousness of my actions. "I understand," I said, "but I didn't break any laws. I acted responsibly, safely, and legally. You can't fine me for enjoying rainwater on my property." After hours of negotiation and tense discussion, a deal was reached. The fine was dropped. The HOA agreed to revise its rules, and most importantly, I had made a statement. No organization, no rule, and no fine could bully me into compliance when I was within my rights. The neighborhood reaction was electric. People came by, some to congratulate me, others to ask questions about how I managed it. I even had a few neighbors asking for advice on setting up rainwater barrels. Legally, because now they trusted that taking control of nature could be done safely and smartly. But there was one moment that stuck with me forever. Mrs. Reynolds, the gossip-prone neighbor, walked over with a slightly sheepish smile. I didn't think you'd do it," she admitted. "I thought you were crazy, but wow, that was impressive." "Thanks," I said. "Sometimes you just have to let nature handle the rest." That line became a mantra, not just for me, but for anyone feeling powerless against rules that didn't make sense. Sometimes the best way to deal with control is to embrace what you can't fight and do it brilliantly. The HOA, on the other hand, never fully recovered their credibility. Residents questioned rules more openly, board meetings became more transparent, and some even left the association entirely. My story had sparked change, and I hadn't even tried. There was laughter, too. I'd never felt such satisfaction standing in my backyard, watching the water settle, seeing people smile, and knowing the HOA was no longer the all-powerful entity it had once pretended to be. I remember walking around the neighborhood that evening. Kids waved, some neighbors stopped me to chat, and even the usually critical Mr. Johnson nodded in approval. It was a small victory for the community, yes, but a huge personal victory. I had defended my property, my rights, and my pride, and I'd done it with ingenuity, not aggression. As the sun set, the wet streets glimmered in the fading light. I felt a quiet sense of triumph. Nature had done what no letter, no fine, and no threat could ever do. It reminded everyone that control is temporary, but courage is lasting. "I did it," I whispered. I stood my ground, and the world watched. Looking back, I realized this wasn't just about water. It was about standing up for yourself when others try to control you unfairly, about finding creative solutions when the rules are unreasonable, about showing courage in the face of authority. And yes, it was about having a little fun while making a point. The story ended with me cleaning up my backyard, checking the pond, and smiling at the reflection of the sky and the water, calm, serene, and satisfied. The HOA may have tried to scare me, but I had turned their tactics into a lesson for everyone. Sometimes, the simplest, most natural actions can have the greatest impact. I called a few friends, sharing the story and laughing over the chaos. They congratulated me, but more importantly, they understood. This wasn't just revenge. It was justice done creatively. The final lesson? Rules exist, yes, but fairness, common sense, and courage matter more. And when you're pushed to the edge, sometimes you have to let nature handle the rest. If you've ever been trapped by rules that make no sense, I said in my final reflection, take a stand. Find a clever way, a legal way, a smart way. And remember, the world respects bold action. The world respects courage. And sometimes the best solution is letting nature do the talking. By the end, the neighborhood was buzzing, the HOA humbled, and I, victorious. The story of the $50,000 fine had become a legend in the community. And I had learned something invaluable, standing up for yourself, while respecting the rules and the world around you, can create extraordinary results. If you've ever felt trapped by unfair rules or authority, take a page from my story. Be bold, be smart, and stand your ground. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story, because everyone deserves to see what happens when one person refuses to back down. And remember, sometimes it's best to just let nature handle the rest.